Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It's morning here in Sydney, Australia. I'm actually down here, been down here for about a month now with the family, and doing great. Makes it for an early morning start for this one, but it's a pleasure to be a part of GRIMM. So today we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about the Disclose.io project, vulnerability disclosure and hacker safe harbor in 2020. So who the hell is this guy? My name's Casey Ellis. Bryson was very generous with his intro there. I'm the founder, chairman, and CTO of BugCrowd. BugCrowd is a vulnerability disclosure and security crowdsourcing platform. We actually started off the space in 2012, ran the first programs back then, and obviously that's all kind of caught on since then, which has been cool. So doing the tech and the founding leadership side of that company. 20 years of InfoSec. So basically started straight out of high school, got into it and got rolling from there. My career arc is starting off as a hacker as a kid, moving into pen testing as a professional, getting across into, call it the dark side, solution sales and architecture before, breaking bad and deciding that I wanted to build some stuff. And that eventually led to BugCrowd. That was kind of the most recent thing that I've worked on from a company standpoint, continue to work there and grow that. And really, what Disclose.io is a product of solving, looking around and solving some of the bigger kind of systemic, or trying to solve some of the biggest systemic issues around this conversation, this relationship that exists between hackers and people that build stuff. It's the builder breaker mindset. How do we make that healthy? How do we make that feedback loop as tight as possible? But I'll get into that in a second. So these are some of the details where you guys can catch me personally, and where you can catch me in context of the Disclose.io project. And there's obviously the hustle and the hacker in the mix there. Setting up the story. So, the whole idea of hackers being able to contribute positively to society, when you think about it, is relatively new. If you go back to the kind of overarching legal frameworks that exist around security research, most of them were created without the concept of good faith really being broadly understood at the time that they were created. The story behind CFAA, and there's probably people on this webinar that are actually around for this, or were at least close to it. So correct me if there's anything that needs to be corrected here, but I've heard this enough times that I believe it is actually true. It's a product of Ronald Reagan actually watching the War Games movie and promptly freaking out, realizing there needs to be legislation to be able to defend computers against malicious computer offense activity. And then really not doing a whole lot with that legislation since. The CFAA in and of itself actually is seen by a lot of other parts of the world as almost the grandfather of the legal frameworks and the language that exists there as well. So this is all birthed out of really a situation that was fundamentally fearful, and a situation that fundamentally didn't understand the kinds of things that a lot of the security researchers that are on this webinar and that are a part of this conference today, what we do. We think bad, but we do good. It doesn't have that kind of framework. So what we did at BugCrowd coming into it was look around at the potential of the white hat community and its ability to help, and tried to figure out how can we connect that to as much of the problem space as we can. There's a couple of things that happened as a part of it that basically kicked off these initiatives to start working on how to make policy easier and how to make the whole connection between builders and breakers more successful, more ubiquitous, and I'll get to that in a second. So here's a little bit of history of really how things came together with Disclose.io. In 1995, Netscape started the Bugs bounty program, which is pretty astonishing when you think about it. I've had the privilege and the opportunity of speaking to some of the people that were involved in that, and for them, there was a couple of things going on. One was the fact that they were releasing software out onto the internet and running it on a network, in some cases for the first time. And they, weird things started to happen, as always does when you put software out in front of other people on a network for the first time. What they realized was it wasn't just about protecting their product and the users of their product at that point in time in terms of the growth of DARPANET and the internet itself. It was actually about protecting the trust and the future of the internet as well. Because if they're going out there and doing stuff, it's breaking, there's unexpected things going on, and people can't have that confidence and that trust then that actually threatens the potential, future impact of the internet. So quite an incredible amount of foresight that they put into launching their bugs bounty program. They dropped the S later on because it's cleaner, apparently. It's a little Valley joke for y'all who caught that one. But that's widely seen as the origin of technology bug bounties. Obviously, lock picking bug bounties go back into the 18th and 17th century. There's other examples of bounties in a software and security standpoint, but Netscape's broadly accepted as the first technology security bug bounty program. Fast forward to 2008, Google and Facebook jump in. There's others that jumped in as well, but they're the ones that started getting really noisy about it and making the concept kind of better known. Bugcrowd was actually formed out of a bunch of conversations that I had with pentest customers who'd seen some of the PR and some of the kind of the education stuff that Google and Facebook had done around their vulnerability rewards programs, and looked at it and thought that sort of makes sense. Like if we're up against an army of adversaries, then being able to access an army of allies to balance things out just seems logical. Like how can we start to think about doing that? So we launched our first program in 2012. And by 2013, and for those of you who've run a disclosure or a VRP before, you'll probably nod and smile at this one. We started realizing that legal teams don't really know how to write disclosure policies. And when a legal team doesn't know how to do something, they'll tend to write War and Peace. This isn't, I think, the fault of the legal team. It's just a very different concept to the ones that are used to constructing language around to protect the business. So there was that. But then there was this issue of like hackers don't seem to read the briefs in the first place. You've got folks that are just trying to do their thing from a security research standpoint, and that's still a common thing today. You've got folks that have English as a second language, for example. You've got a lot of the folks that actually aren't from a legal background. If they're presented with this ginormous wall of text with all of these different legal turnarounds in it, they're either going to not understand it or glaze over it completely. And the challenge with all of this is that the CFAA and other anti-hacking laws in other parts of the world actually make those two things potentially a felony crime. If you end up in a position where you're operating in terms of intent and in terms of what you're wanting and trying to do as a good faith hacker, but you're finding yourself outside of the rules, all sorts of bad things can happen at that point. And that's really not the goal. That's not why anti-hacking laws were created in the first place. And it's not obviously the goal of vulnerability disclosure or incentivized vulnerability disclosure in the context of the bug bounty program. The CFAA, it's being used. This is a chart of the number of cases filed, the number of defendants involved, and the number of folks that were actually found guilty between 1995 and close to today. I think the data goes up to 2018 in this graph. And I personally believe that there's other conversations that we can have around where the CFAA should and potentially will go. But the core concept of someone being able to defend themselves legally from malicious computer activity, I think that's fundamentally not the wrong thing to have available as a defender. It's the implementation that's the problem. It's the fact that most hacking looks dual use on the receiving side, or it looks malicious on the receiving side. Hacking is inherently dual use. So how does the law, how do the legal frameworks that are around this type of thing distinguish between someone who has good intent and someone who doesn't, someone who needs to actually be pursued potentially criminally if that's necessary? So really, at this point in time, 2013, 2014, we're starting to think, okay, how do we make it easy to do this well? Like lawyers are having a hard time writing this stuff. They're having a hard time getting their heads around the concept. Hackers aren't necessarily reading, these ginormous briefs that come out, or even understanding even the simpler ones. So what we started to do was and that's a incorrect point at the top there. 2014, if you jump down to the third point, the open source vulnerability framework was released in collaboration between Bugcrowd and Jim Denaro and some of the folk over at CypherLaw. So what we did is we got together and we said, okay, how can we balance these different forces that exist on these types of briefs and basically create an open source standard, essentially, that people can go off and use, or at least use as a framework and a template to build their own programs from. Around about the same time, 2014 was when ISO 24147 and 30111 in terms of vulnerability intake and vulnerability coordination were released as well. They were behind a paywall at that point in time. They released them more broadly later on. And there's aspects of that do speak directly to this language piece, but our goal with the project at that point in time was just to make something that was as boilerplate and as simple to use as possible. Jumping around in the points here, as I mentioned, 2014 to 2017, we saw the OSVDF language directly used and grandfathered by 500 or so programs and translated into 4 different languages. The way these templates tend to work, as is the case with a lot of like legal contract type languages, people copy pasta. They'll take slabs out of it that they feel apply to them. They'll take parts that they want to modify and add to them or change them or cut them out. And we definitely saw that happen with the language that we created. There's still artifacts of it in a lot of different briefs that are out there today. Yeah, so at that point, things are going pretty well. And obviously, we're heads down working in BugCrowd and growing the business and doing all those sorts of things, like extending the use case of the crowd out into crowdsourced pen testing, getting into all sorts of different security research and actually delivering that. In 2018, a woman by the name of Ellis started hitting the talk circuit in the security space around this concept of safe harbor. So the idea of like, what are the exemptions, in the absence of the anti-hacking frameworks and the things like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and those different controls. In the absence of those kind of overarching laws having a concept of someone operating in good faith, how do we create a carve-out? How do we create a band-aid that allows hackers to operate without feeling like they're potentially going to get prosecuted? At the same time, Dropbox launched their safe harbor clause, and really what happened at that point is that we got connected up all together and we started to collaborate. In 2018, Disclose.io was spun out of the OSVDF project and the Legal Bug Bounty, which was a Meets project, and in 2019, BugCrowd made the default. And going back to the CFAA piece, like what I mentioned before about these sorts of rules being used in the same way for good faith hackers as they would be for bad. This is Kevin Finisterre. Some of you might be familiar with the challenges with DJI earlier on in their disclosure program. Kevin does a lot of work with hardware, a lot of work with drones, submitted some issues across them. Basically, they didn't like them. The way the whole thing went down was such that, on the receiving side, they felt quite threatened and felt quite concerned about the types of issues that were being found in their stuff. And if you go through this letter, I'll put this up later, there are actually threats against Kevin under the CFAA for as far as we can tell, and as far as their brief was actually written at that point in time. There was a whole bunch of conduct and a whole bunch of security research that was perfectly within the boundaries of what they'd set out as actually authorized for him to do. So these are the sorts of things we're trying to avoid with Disclose.io. It's really this idea of, taking the chilling effect that a lot of these legal frameworks have on people that have the potential to help. And keep in mind, I'm not talking about bug bounty programs or crowdsourced security right now. I'm talking about vulnerability disclosure. So the idea of basically an organization being able to receive security input from the outside on a reactive basis, and the ability for people that have, eyes to see, really, when it comes down to identifying security issues, to do that, to look for things that might be wrong. It's essentially neighborhood watch for the internet. And I disambiguate there because there is a lot of confusion, I think, between those different models. They are similar in that there's hackers and there's people being hacked and actually receiving information to improve their security as a part of it. But the reasons you do them, and I think the output of all of them is slightly different. There was a survey taken, I believe this was 2018, where 60% of the respondents said that they don't submit vulnerabilities for fear of legal retribution. Like, how do we get that number down to zero? Which got us thinking. This is one of the reasons that we actually took this whole thing and put it within Disclose.io as its own vendor agnostic open source project. Like, how do we make this go viral? How do we take the adoption of vulnerability disclosure programs with best practice and turn it into something that is ubiquitous, something that everyone does? And that's how we kind of came out with this. What I'm going to do in the rest of this talk is lay out what the different components of Disclose.io are, Obviously give you guys some calls to action in terms of how you can potentially use it, how you can talk about it, how you can contribute to it, push back if you feel it's appropriate, because this is an open source thing. It's a work in progress. Our goal here is to make vulnerability disclosure ubiquitous. And really our vision is a healthy and ubiquitous internet immune system. Karen Ellis, who's Amit's sister, did a TED talk in 2016 that actually referred to hackers as the internet's immune system. I thought it was a perfect analogy. It's like this idea of the internet being a functioning organism that has these agents within it that understand what sickness looks like. They understand, we understand what weakness, what the things that need to be attacked and thrown out or even improved look like, and that's a functional part of the role that hackers play on the internet. And really, the core problem, if you boil it down, is that the internet doesn't really know how to work with its immune system all that well yet. We've made incredible progress, I believe, over the past 5 or 6 years, but we're still not there. There's still a lot of organizations that are just thinking about this for the first time. If you're on the receiving end of a vulnerability report and you're not expecting it, it's a scary thing to do. So how do we just make that normal? And really, our mission is to drive vulnerability disclosure adoption through safety, simplicity, and standardization. So let's go into how we do that. So here are the components of Disclose.io. There's the terms, and really the idea here is to eliminate friction through standardization. How do we create packages of terms that are so easy to understand and use that people can just get started? The list in and of itself is this top to tail list of every vulnerability disclosure and bounty program that we can find on the internet. And really the goal of that is network effect. How do we promote and celebrate the people that are engaging in this best practice? How do we advertise to the consumer and to the hacker that this company does run neighborhood watch for the internet? For the hacker, they can help. For the consumer, they can feel that a little bit safer. And then the logo is really about normalization. How do we promote that posture even further and reduce this wall of legal text down to like a logo that people can see? So here are the terms. And again, I'll post these slides afterwards so you can actually go and check this stuff out. But essentially, they're a collection of vulnerability disclosure templates, copy and pasting as a foundational framework or as a starting point for new versions. This is contributed to by all sorts of different people. The list of folk on the side are the kind of organizations where people that are contributing work for and the kind of context that they bring to that contribution. These aren't endorsements, just to be super clear on that, but it gives you a representation of where the kind of brains that we can borrow in an open source context are coming from to actually build this thing and to make it resilient as we go forward. It's an interesting challenge in terms of like legal design, because functionally what we're doing is we're trying to balance our completeness of the terminology with readability and brevity. Remember what I said before, like a lot of the people that actually get presented with this stuff don't speak English as a first language, and they don't necessarily have a legal background. So making it accessible to the average user, we're functionally trying to create a EULA that people will actually read and be able to follow, which in and of itself is a hard thing to do. But we've done quite a lot of work on it, and if you see the terms, you'll sort of see how that's shaken out there. And then this third arm of the balancing act is really this idea of bilateral safety. Like, how can you make it safe for the organization who's functionally making the changes to their kind of legal contracts and the things that they've got presented out to the internet? How can you give that to them in a way that's still allowing them the safety of being able to defend themselves from actual malicious attack, whilst inviting researchers in to contribute and to provide this feedback loop? And then for researchers, how can you make it for them so that they understand that, yeah, these are the things that I can and can't do within the context of this program or this organization. And if I do these things, then I can feel safe. I can feel like I'm not necessarily going to get my door kicked in. That can actually go off my radar as someone who's trying to help the internet be a safer place. And I can just get on with doing that, provided obviously that I stay within the guidelines of what's been set out. So it's tricky, but we've got a bunch of different pieces that we've added here. Simple Safe Harbor is designed as a block of text that you can add to essentially any program to add safe harbor language around it. Then we go a bit deeper. There's global terms. It's basically a boilerplate with the core concepts covered that isn't regionalized. So it's not calling out things like CFAA or any of the other region-specific languages. It's more of a concept-based document. As you double click down, we've got terms set up for Canada to cover the various laws there, and then CFAA, DMCA for the US and so on. We have released a draft. We're actually working on iterations of a draft for election security specific language as well. So watch that space and actually get in touch if you want to help out and be a part of that one as well, because obviously it's getting more and more important as a subject this year. The second piece is the list, community powered, and all of the different kind of status components. Like I think the core concepts of or the core components of a VDP, it's the intake channel, it's the policy, and then it's the processes that are on the back end of things. So it's the first two that we're looking for to be able to say, yes, this is a vulnerable disclosure program. Then there's all of these other things that can be added as features, and we make mention of those as well. So safe harbor obviously is one. Are they offering rewards? If they are, then it's kind of a public bug bounty program, but that looks like a VDP with rewards added as a subset. So we call that stuff out. It's really designed as this open source directory of things that anyone can use. We see researchers using this to look for new targets. We're starting to see people actually render this up to say, okay, this is what the state of the internet looks like, and so on. Bugcrowd uses it to power a list that we have on our website that people can go and look at to see who's doing what and so on. It's licensed under CCA 4.0, so it is fully open source, can be used. JSON CSV, it's readable, but it's also machine readable. We've worked pretty hard to make that possible as well. And then the logo itself, and then just to talk about these concepts of safe harbor. What we refer to as safe harbor is a term that I think people can access easily. Really what they are is carve-outs or exemptions. Partial safe harbor here, which is the not blocked in logo at the top there. It's really a good faith statement. What the organization is saying, you see a lot of these if you go through and read disclosure or bounty briefs. It's basically saying, look, if you're cool, we agree not to pursue legal action, which in and of itself is better than nothing. There's a lot of programs that are out there that have no statement about the fact that this even is like legally difficult or legally like murky territory in the absence of clarifying statements like this one. And that's not good at all. So we, any program that's set up like that, we call that no safe harbor. The partial safe harbor is someone saying, look, if you're cool, we'll be cool too. It still leaves a lot of doors open. Full safe harbor is actually explicit authorization against the different laws that might come into play. And these are really the four core tenets of what we refer to create that carve out. First is the access authorization under anti-hacking laws. So kind of the linchpin of CFAA and its equivalents is this concept of authorized access. The problem with authorized access is if you're doing security testing, kind of your job is to like defeat authorized access and exceed authorization. It's part of what we do for a living, right? So how do you create an exemption for that in a way that still allows containment of what the rules might look like, what is good faith behavior, what might look like bad faith behavior? That's the linchpin term there. Exemption under the anti-circumvention laws that exist, like DMCA. So this is more for it's more relevant for like car hacking, IoT, industrial security, like things that you can pick up and hold. In general, CFA is for someone else's computer, and DMCA and those types of laws are for your own. So these are exemptions against bypassing any circumvention, any circumvention controls that would exist to allow you to do security research. Basically making it do what it shouldn't. There are rules within DMCA that actually prohibit that or can prohibit that, and this is a pass from those. Exemption against acceptable use policies and terms of service. This was the kind of components that were meant to be dealt with by Aaron's law. It's kind of an extension of the DMCA piece, but it's specific to anything that's like around that particular piece of software or that particular system. If it says you will not hack this thing, and part of what you're doing to try to help them is hacking this thing, then that's problematic from a legal standpoint. So the exemption carves that out. And then a general acknowledgement of good faith. The idea that if you follow the ground rules and then you operate as a good faith hacker as defined by the front of this legal language, what you're doing is good. What you're doing is actually intended to help us. We recognize it as such, and we'll approach it as such. So this is where it gets interesting. If you put it all together, what we're trying to do, and this is kind of the viral aspect of it, how do we make this into something that's just becomes a normal part of being on the internet? I think vulnerability disclosure has gone from being the thing that like the really weird organizations do to being something that's far more a question of like, when are we going to do this and how, than like if it's a good idea. What we'd love to see it get to is the point where it's just a normal part of being on the internet. It's not even necessarily a part of the conversation it's just a thing that gets done. And again, this is vendor agnostic. Like Bugcrowd helps organizations run these programs. I think the bigger thing here is to make it simple for everyone, regardless of whether they're using a platform, whether they're doing it themselves, or however they might actually execute on this program. Like, how can we get this front end piece right to maximize the chance of success? But also, how can we make it viral? So if you start on the left here, an organization initiates a BDP. They can add themselves to the list. They just commit a PR to GitHub, and off they go. We'll review it. The team will review it and add it to the list. Sometimes what happens is, open source contributors or hackers out there on the internet, they'll see a new program, they'll add it to the list themselves. Either way, it gets added. At which point we're looking at it and saying, does this have safe harbor or not? Does it have the provisions and clauses that make it safe for hackers to participate, to feel safe, or is it missing those things? If it's got none, then the organization can see that because they've been added to the list with a big none there. At which point they can see the terms and they've got options to be able to add those things to the list. So say that loop gets kicked in, they do make the changes to add these provisions in. All of a sudden they do have safe harbor, either full or partial. We basically say, cool, you're full or partial, here's the logo, you can display that, or you can talk about your program as having joined Disclose.io or having this compliance and this sort of endorsement that we have through the logo. And at that point, a few things start to happen. Like customers see, like their customers, the consumer sees the logo. The interesting thing about vulnerability disclosure is that, like, it's a concept that a non-technical person can understand. If you go talking about, ML powered blockchain enabled such and such a thing, it might be a really good solution, but the average punter is not really going to know what you're talking about. The concept of neighborhood watch for the internet, I think, is a concept that basically anyone can understand. And the idea of being able to say, cool, this is part of what I do in my security program, ultimately nets out to consumer confidence and improved business for the organizations that do that. And then on the other side, good faith hackers see the logo, their trust increases. They're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to see a wall of text. I can actually help out. This is where I report an issue that I've just discovered, whatever else might happen as a knock-on effect of that. And security improves. The company learns how to deal with reactive input from the outside over time because they've built out their response processes. They know how to do vuln coordination in-house. They know how to remediate. They get better at that over time as that conversation continues. And as a result, security is improved. And then all of a sudden, the other organizations that appears to that first organization that started the program notice all of this, and they start thinking about doing it themselves. And then the cycle repeats. So this is really kind of the goal here, is like, how do we increase the R0 of doing it right? How do we increase the R0 of launching vulnerability disclosure programs and having that be a productive part of having the internet be a healthy place, having it have a functioning and a vibrant immune system? And then how do we help people do it right so that as they launch these programs, they're not getting themselves into a position where they're confusing good hackers with bad ones, and they are actually working on learning from what they're hearing from the research community, not just running around and spotting bugs. So this is really the concept of what we're trying to get done here, is to see this grow as an idea that people can recognize, that people can understand and say, oh, okay, that's that neighborhood watch, the safety house, whatever you want to call it. It's a logo that signifies that, there is input and there's a crowd, a community, a group of people that are helping make this service that I'm about to trust my data or my process to safer. And I feel more confident about that as a result. And TLDR is that it's working. We've seen incredible growth, obviously, I think full disclosure and bug bounty programs was very much a niche thing when Bugcrowd started off. What we've seen since is not just the growth of our platform and others, but the adoption and really kind of the pushing forward of vulnerability disclosure of hackers as a part of the internet's immune system by all sorts of different places. Like the DHS with their binding operational directive at the beginning of this year, we've had Kaspersky join Disclose.io and actually do the whole thing that I just mentioned before with this kind of network effect and this idea of like, here are some of the things that we do from a security standpoint to make your product safer. The election piece I mentioned before, and obviously the Pentagon and the Hack the Pentagon program, which has been going on for quite a while, really is almost a masthead of, I think, how the network effect can promote and provoke others to adopt the input of the hacker community as part of their security program. So what's next? Goals for us, we want full coverage of the 5 countries in the terms by the end of this year. We want to extend it outside of English-speaking languages, but most of the contributors and the core folk that are working on this are English-speaking, so it seems like a logical place to start. We want to see 3,000 programs with 30% full safe harbor adoption on the list, and we want to see the logo out on 500 web properties of all sorts of types and sizes. I think this ranges from the 2-person startup that just got into an accelerator program right up to very large organizations that want to be able to clearly and simply articulate the fact that they are engaging the hacker community to make their products safer. So that's where we're trying to go this year. And as a call to action for the folk that are on the talk, for practitioners, lawyers, executives, start a vulnerability disclosure program, or at least start looking into it. I think this is, especially I think with some of the changes that have driven us all to digitize more quickly than we were planning to. The reason that we're having a virtual conference with me speaking from Sydney, Australia right now, like this is pushing all of this stuff forward. So if you're not already thinking about it, now's a really good time to start, because I do believe it's going to be a normal part of being on the internet for any security practitioner over the next few years. If you're already running one, add your safe harbor terms, like join Disclosure, go check out the repos, see what you can take from it. If you can copy paste and that works for your legal teams and for your organization, great. If you have to modify it, go ahead and do that. But consider this idea of the chilling effect that some of these anti-hacking laws have on security research, and be best of breed. Actually step out in front and do that whole thing. Contribution to the Disclose.io repo, we are looking for Australian regionalized language as well as UK at the moment. So folks that come from a legal background that want to help out on that side, we'd love to hear from you. And additions and updates to the list are always welcome, and please spread the good word. Again, this is not just about a platform that can facilitate this or any of that type of thing, or even consultancy that can help organizations get these programs together. It's about making it widely known that it's a good idea that everyone should be doing in the first place and spreading that message around. On the security researcher side, continue hacking the planet. This is something that I added in a couple of days ago, just looking at the different generations that are operating in security research right now. For the younger players, push for better security, but have empathy. I think we're at a point now where there's like the old dogs that have been around doing this for a long time that understand all the blood, sweat, and tears that's gone into this conversation over the last 30 years. And then there's this huge new cohort of people that have just kind of showed up. And they're both important and they're both awesome. But the younger folk don't necessarily have the context of what it looks like or what it feels like to receive a bug on the other side. So that's my encouragement for the younger players. And for the older ones, consider the example you're setting for new entrants who lack the context. I think things like full disclosure functionally will always and do need to exist as a part of getting over failure of a process like this. But a younger security researcher doesn't necessarily understand that. They might think that's just how you do stuff. And those sorts of misunderstandings do threaten all of the progress that we've made in the relationship between hackers and defenders. So just be mindful. I'm not saying don't do it, but do be mindful of the fact that you've got really the next generation watching on and looking at you to see what's okay and what is normal, what's best practice, what can be done. And yeah, whatever opportunities exist to mentor, encourage, and train the younger generation. I really do believe that the idea of younger players being able to teach older ones and the older ones being able to mentor is the future of most things, let alone the internet, which is accelerating at 1 billion miles an hour. So that's my endorsement for the old dogs on the call. And there's the call to action again, because I didn't move that slide to the right place, but there you go. So that's the end of the talk, and yeah, really appreciate GrimmCon for putting this on. Thank you for the invite, Bryson, and for responding to the CFP. I hope you all have had a fantastic day with all of the content. I'm looking forward to catching up on some of the stuff I missed while I was on the opposite side of the planet, catching up on some rest ahead of this. But yeah, thank you very much.
Talks will be recorded and posted, so follow GRIMM Cyber on Twitter or LinkedIn, and they'll be coming out. Can't really tell you the timing other than we're hoping for about a month. We don't have time for questions for Casey here at GoToMeeting because it's about 4 minutes until Jeff Stewart's talk, but Casey will be jumping over to Discord and will be in the expert track for your questions and commentary. So Casey, good to see you again, man.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Take care.